Very warm welcome to our friends who are viewing this at work, at home, and in the classroom. My name is Randolph Wilt. I'm a PhD in communications, and I've been teaching communications for several years and helping people in the business world, corporate leaders, to be better public speakers. Today we're going to be talking about how to speak in terms of a persuasive speech. This is probably one of the more favorite topics that we have, just because it's something that people are quite often good at. They don't realize it, and other people try to be a little better at it. So let's start off with a question. That is, who makes the very best cup of coffee? And the reason why I go down this path is because the primary part about persuasive speaking is to show logic, to show credibility, and to show especially passion. And I like to use the example of the coffee because people are compassionate about coffee. They're passionate, they're logical, they're credible about it. So let's talk about your favorite coffee. So is it Starbucks? Starbucks, which is of course based in Seattle. Very popular. I think they have over 2,000 locations. Is it your favorite? Is it because it's strong? Is it because it's bold? Or maybe it's Seattle's best, a competitors of Starbucks, which I understand now is a subsidiary of Starbucks. I'm not sure about that, but that's kind of what I've heard. Maybe it's Caribou Coffee, a very favorite coffee up in the Minnesota areas, over into Denver and Salt Lake City. It's probably a very, very good competitor to Starbucks. A lot of people think that's their favorite coffee. Or perhaps it's the Coffee Bean. This is a chain. It's called the Coffee Bean and the Tea Leaf. It's a little bit more of a, let's say, a mall style, even though they do have freestanding locations. What about Cafe Du Monde? Now we're going away from these big chains into maybe a regional or local coffee, and this is what they call the original French market coffee stand. So if you're from New Orleans, this could very likely be your very favorite coffee. You could be very passionate about this because it's what they call, I believe it's called chicory. It's a French coffee served with beignets, and just a very, very much of a favorite. Switching now gears in coffee, moving a little bit away from the typical coffee house over to the donut house, which also serves coffee. Dunkin' Donuts, which started out as a donut place, has an extremely loyal following of coffee drinkers, partly because they have a very good cup of coffee at a very reasonable price. I think it's actually under $2 a cup. In the Northeast, if you're from the Boston area, from New York, you would probably say there's a Dunkin' Donuts on every corner. You know, I've heard one time that you can stand on one corner and you can turn and look all around 360 degrees and you can see 3 or 4 more Dunkin' Donuts. There's that many of them. Where some of us have a Starbucks on every corner, in the Northeast, there's a Dunkin' Donuts on every corner. A very good cup of coffee at a very reasonable price. But as you come further south, down to the Carolinas, you're going to find yourself encountering a different type of donut house that serves coffee. And this would be Krispy Kreme. And people in the South, they love their Krispy Kreme coffee. It's a bold coffee, but they also have a milder coffee. But it's a something that you would go to the Krispy Kreme donut house to get a donut and a cup of coffee, once again, at a very reasonable price. But if you're from Canada, from the upper Midwest, around, maybe saying that wrong, but up there in the Michigan area, the Ohio, the New York area, you would experience Tim Hortons, primarily Canada. And I think the best way to describe Tim Hortons, it is the Dunkin' Donuts of Canada. People up there, they love the coffee. They will buy canisters of the coffee. They will take that coffee and they'll mix it with other types of coffee and brew different types of flavors using Tim Horton as their primary base to the coffee. Well, I'm saying mix with other coffees. I've heard people who mixed it with Folgers or Maxwell House or Maryland Club. Now, you don't need to ask me how that works with different flavors, but that's, anyhow, what I've been told. That's kind of an interesting concept. Now, let's switch a little bit over toward a different type of coffee. This would be McDonald's. McDonald's was voted recently as having the very best cup of coffee in America from a large chain. That doesn't compete with the, let's say, the little local coffee houses, but you can get a cup of coffee, a good cup of coffee, for $1 that is very well roasted. A lot of people swear by McDonald's coffee. They cannot get going without stopping by McDonald's, getting their $1 cup of coffee. And if you remember, not too many years back, McDonald's created Mac Cafe. And that is their coffee products. And in there you can get the latte, the espresso, all the different things. And so McDonald's has really bumped in and moved into that coffee market that's been captured by people like Dunkin' Donuts and by Starbucks for so long. So who really does make the best cup of coffee? That is the question. So the point here, and I love this little video of this slide here, because you see on one side you have the Starbucks coffee, and the other side you have Peet's Coffee and Tea, which is another fairly large chain, and this actually was shot somewhere in Germany. So I love this slide because the people could actually go back and forth, a coffee house just across the street from each other. So when you're talking about coffee, you say what makes the best cup of coffee, you have to think about the different things that are important to you. Is it the taste? Is it the texture? Is it the flavor? Is it the experience? Is it the price? All these things are important to you. These are the logical concepts of a cup of coffee. Is it the price? Is it the taste? Then you have to think about what is the passionate part about the cup of coffee. You know, are you passionate about the taste? Are you passionate about the flavor? Are you passionate about being loyal to your part of the country? If you came from the Northwest, you'd probably be very loyal to Seattle's Best or Starbucks. If you came from the South, you may be loyal to drinking the Krispy Kreme coffee. You would seek it out. So that's your passion, to be loyal to it. So coffee is something that is very passionate to people. They have their minds made up. What is a good cup of coffee? If you took a room of 30 people and you asked them what was their best favorite cup of coffee, you would find probably at least getting 10 different answers, because people have different things that they think are important. And if you say, what is it? They would come out and say, I like this one because of the price. I like this because it's strong and bold. I like this because it is a very heavy taste. I like this because of the nutty flavor. I like this because of the thick texture that comes with it, from almost like drinking an espresso. So people become very passionate about it. Well, when you are doing persuasion in terms of a persuasive speech, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to take your passion about the topic and your logic about it and your credibility, and you take that information, you roll it all up into one, and that's what you're presenting to your audience. Now, the difference between a persuasive speech and an informative speech is very little. You're both of them are getting information out, but the main difference is the informative speech, you're imparting the knowledge on the people so that they can take the information and think about it. But a persuasive speech, you're taking information and you're putting it toward the audience with the intent to try to change the audience's, let's say, their attitude or their belief or their value. You're trying to do what we call a call of action, which means that after you present the information, you're asking them to change an opinion. And that's the difference between a persuasive speech and an informative speech. The informative is just getting information. The persuasive is to get information to help someone to change their attitude, to change their belief, or to change their value. So persuasion is the process of intentionally changing or reinforcing attitudes, beliefs, values, and or behaviors. And the persuasive speaker invites the listener, or he can motivate, or she can motivate the listener to make a choice. You know, rather than just offering information like informative speech, you're actually inviting the listeners to be involved and to help make a choice in there. So I keep using these different phrases: attitude, beliefs, and values, and I'm also going to add here behavior. So let's talk about what these really are. Attitudes. Attitudes are your likes and dislike. You know, what is your attitude about Starbucks coffee? Your attitude maybe is too strong. I don't like it because it's too strong. Or maybe your attitude is, I really do like it because it is bold, it wakes me up in the morning. So that's your attitude, your likes and dislikes. But your belief is different. Your belief is what is true and what is false. So let's go back to this coffee again. I've had people tell me that Starbucks is picked from the top part of the mountains in Colombia, where the beans grow in a colder environment. And because of that, the beans are very rich. They create the very dark, that robust, bold coffee. Okay, that could be your belief. Your belief is that true or is this false? A lot of people look at beliefs and they have something they think because they grew up thinking something. If I had told you this over and over and over, and someone tried to convince you that Seattle's Best is a better coffee than Starbucks, you may go back and say that Dr. Wilt has told me before that the Starbucks coffees are grown high in the colder climate that makes them robust, more of a rich flavor. And I believe him, so therefore I believe that Starbucks is a better coffee. So your belief is basically, like it says here, your sense of what is true and what is false. Next comes your value, the conception of what is right and what is wrong. Some things we know are right to do, some things we know are wrong. And the last one is your behavior, which is taking all these things above, and it will guide you into changing your behavior. Now we're going to talk just a little bit more in detail about these. So we're going to go from the easiest to the hardest to change. The easiest thing to change is someone's behavior. Will you follow the other people? Will you follow what they do just because, let's say, groupthink? Everyone's doing it, so you're going to do it. Quite often it's very easy to change the behavior with a persuasive speech by sitting there saying that, it's not right, it's not good to go to McDonald's because McDonald's paying lower minimum wages and they're not taking care of people. So all of us as students or all of us as, let's say, business people, we're just going to boycott them. We're going to go somewhere else. So sometimes it's very easy to change the behavior, but these other three really play into the fact of changing that behavior. So based from that, you go to attitude. Attitudes, like I said, is your likes and your dislike. And this is truly peer pressure. You know what you like, you know what you dislike. You may like chocolate, but if you're out with a bunch of people and they all say they don't like the chocolate, then you're out of luck. You're not going to go get the chocolate. What if they started telling you about all the horrors that chocolate has, that it brings on people, that it makes them ill, it puts the sugar in their body and they become hyper and all this? They can make you all of a sudden dislike something. Your peers can make you do that. This is a major part of persuasion, is getting people to follow suit because they're following their peers. You're out there saying, this is what people do. This is what they do. They recycle. They're out there recycling items. If you don't recycle items, then you're hurting the environment. You're hurting nature. So it's very important that you follow what we all do and recycle. So when you do something like that there, you're actually encouraging people to change from a like to a dislike or dislike over to a like. Next one is your belief, the sense of what is true and what is false. We all have this. This is something that is built into us just from the knowledge that we've built over the years, or maybe just over the few months. And it's typically from our own investigative research that we go in there and we look. And let's talk now about the recycling again. So everyone is recycling. So you should recycle because everyone's doing it. But maybe you've done some research, and maybe the research you found out says that 50% of the stuff that is recycled actually is put into a landfill. So at that point, your belief may be is that recycling is not what it is cracked up to be. That is actually almost like we're fooling the public. We're charging people money to recycle, and these recycling companies are then only recycling half of it, and the other half of it they're just throwing into the landfills. So you may take the attitude is that recycling is not a true benefit to society. I'm just making this up, folks. But this is where you, as a persuasive speaker, can very easily go in there and convince someone that something is true or something is false. And think about this for a second. If you're talking about the difference between buying an American-made car and a, let's say, a Japanese car, you could go through what's good about it, what is true about the number of, let's say, the number of accidents, the number of recalls, all these things, and you can make someone actually change their belief thinking that American cars are the best cars by presenting all these different points, and all of a sudden they start thinking that, you know what, maybe the American-made car is not the best car, or vice versa. I've heard the other side where people have sat there and talked about how good the Japanese car is, and trying to convince you that it's better than the American-made car, when actually the American-made car runs the same number of mileage before it falls apart, let's say 200,000, whatever. Now, value is the hardest thing to change, and it's the conception between right and wrong. We all have got that. That's our little conscience inside of us talking to us. You know, the little devil on one shoulder, the angel on the other shoulder, saying this is right or this is wrong. And what makes it so difficult to change in people, as you being a persuasive speaker, is because these values are quite often taught by the parents, or they're taught by someone like a mentor, someone who's very important to that particular listener. So when you're out there trying to convince someone that what they think is completely wrong, I'm going to go in there and talk again about this American-made car compared to the Japanese car. I've known people who have grown up and their parents always bought a Lincoln Ford. So here, if you go out there and you start talking about that, you know, that's not the best car, you're having to go in there and convince that person that their father, their grandfather, their great-grandfather was wrong, who'd always bought that Lincoln. So how do you do that? Well, it takes a whole lot of logic and a lot of evidence to convince someone to change the values that their parents built into them, or someone else has built into them. And sometimes that value comes not only from the parents, it can come from a religious institution, you know, maybe from church, what they've learned from church. It may come from friends they grew up with. It could maybe come from a school. And I've seen that happen in that type of case too. So these are the items that a good persuasive speaker works with. You work with, first of all, knowing that the behavior can be changed if you go in there and touch the knowledge that people have embedded considering the topic you're talking about. And that touching is going to work on the attitude and their belief and on the value. Now, how do you remember these different parts about the persuasive speaking? I always use the Three Musketeers because it was written by Alexander Dumas. And he has, now this is a picture of all four of them here, but he had three musketeers. The fourth one was D'Artagnan, but his first one was Athos, he had Porthos, and he had Aramis. Well, when you talk about persuasive speaking, you're talking about three components: ethos, pathos, and logos. I'm sure you can see the correlation. Athos, Porthos, pathos, Aramis, logos. Okay, maybe quite not there, but that's the way I remember these 3 points. Ethos, pathos, and logos. It's a basic part of speaking. Any type of communications you deal with this, but primarily I feel you deal more so than almost any other time with these 3 when you're doing persuasive speaking. So let's first talk about ethos. Ethos is a word, basically means credibility. Credibility is the audience's perception of you, the speaker, how competent you are, how trustworthy you are, and it says here how dynamic and how your charisma. But let's talk about your competency, your trustworthiness. Your competency, it says here, is how informed you are, how skilled and knowledgeable you are. So you cannot be credible if you're talking about, and once again, let's talk about recycling. You cannot be a credible speaker if you have not done the research to know what they do when they recycle, or how the recycling process works. So when someone says, but I don't like paying money to have things recycled, to pay for that blue trash can, if you are knowledgeable and informed, you build up that credibility where they start believing you. And the trustworthiness is that believability that what you're saying is honest and is true. So if I'm sitting here talking to you about buying a Toyota, I'm sitting there telling you that it is being built, the reason why you shouldn't buy it is because they're paying those people in the plants in Japan $2 for a half day's of work, so they're getting paid $4 a day. These people are working 18-hour shifts, and so therefore when you're buying that Toyota, you're encouraging child labor, and you're encouraging basically almost slave labor. Now, are you going to believe me or not? If you know me and you know that from knowing me that I'm a truthful person, you would believe me. But what if I was a total stranger? If I was a total stranger, would you believe me? If I don't give you some type of evidence by showing you some statistics, like maybe some YouTube that shows a investigative reporter going into a Toyota plant, if I don't give you evidence, how do you know I'm telling you the truth? How do you know I'm not just making it up? And of course, we know that happens all the time. People just make up things. And of course, I just made that up. That's not the way Toyota works. Not at all. Toyota is probably one of the more legitimate, one of the good operations. But this has happened before, particularly when you get into like the athletic shoe business, like Nike and Adidas, where they're talking about the people in Vietnam and some of these areas were getting sick from the glue that they were using to put these shoes together, and that's why you shouldn't buy shoes. Well, that's true, but it had changed where they got better operational procedures, but people kept saying that, and it was really hurting the sales. So the persuasion issue, first of all, you've got to be credible. You've got to know what you're talking about. You've got to have checked it out. And you've got to give good evidence of what this is about. And you've got to be believable, which means that you better explain why someone needs to believe you. And the best way to do that is through your credentials. Is that, are you an investigative reporter yourself? Do you work for CNN? Do you work for ABC? Are you a scholar? Have you written journal articles? All these things make you credible. But if you don't have that, then you've got to go in there and build it a different way. And the other way you build that is that you probably go in there and say, from my travels, and then you may talk about different travels you did back in 2010 or whatever, that you went and investigated that Toyota plant, and you actually found out that it was actually a very good plant. So, the next thing is your logic, your logos. Logic is important to persuade. It's how you organize an argument and how you take the reason and then you present the reason out to them in terms of evidence. So when you're talking about a logical argument, you have to first decide what is the problem. The problem, you're informing the audience of the problem and you're presenting the evidence to them to show that there is a problem. How does that problem affect the audience? So let's talk now about this whole thing that came up some years ago called the pink slime. Pink slime was something that was talked about in a lot of the fast food restaurants. I don't know if they talk about McDonald's, Burger King, or whoever, but it's where they would take all parts of the cow, the chicken and the pigs, and they just mush it all together, and it could be the brains, it could be the skulls, it could be the hearts, all parts of them, and they made a pink slime out of it that they would use as a preservative for the rest of the meat, but also as a filler. A lot of people out there who were talking about this, they presented the problem, but the problem is that it was not a good presentation of the problem, because the problem was that in the process of doing this, you may be spreading things like salmonella because it wasn't being cooked. It was a filler for a bunch of different things, not just meat products. The next thing is that they were using all these chickens and these cows that were being caged and everything else. So it was animal abuse in the process. But the problem was not being presented that way because the audience sat there and listened to it and they couldn't figure out why did it really affect them. Okay, there's a problem they're using caged chicken and caged animals, but how does that affect me, the audience? So when you present a problem, you have to make sure that you go in there and present why it's important to the audience. Because if it's not important to the audience, then the audience is not going to buy into it. They're actually going to get bored and think, why am I even sitting here listening to this here? So you've got to go in there and explain how this problem affects the audience. In the case here, it's kind of like we are supporting farmers and ranchers and people out there who are growing the chickens to put them into a cage that maybe is all of 6 inches by 6 inches, instead of those farmers and those ranchers and chicken raisers who actually do the right thing and they raise the chickens appropriately. So then you're sitting there saying, now how does that affect you? Well, what affects you is that you don't know where all those chicken products are showing up. Not only in the pink slime, but maybe they're popping up in the caged chicken eggs in different areas that actually those chickens are being bred in a very, very bad, unhealthy condition, which is therefore translating over to the byproducts. Could be the chicken parts or to the eggs or whatever. That actually could make you sick because of those things are inferior. So therefore now the problem has the true issue to why you, the audience, need to worry about it. So what is the solution? You've got to describe the solution, and you have to also show how that solution, like it says here, may solve or reduce the problem. So what is the solution to this? The solution is to make sure that the USDA is properly auditing and reviewing all these farmers where people like McDonald's, Burger King buys their produce from and gets their chicken and their beef from. If these farmers are not being audited and not living up to standards, then we need to push the USDA to go in there and to penalize who? Penalize McDonald's for it. So we got to give a solution in there. And once you give that solution, now your audience is sitting there saying, now I understand what you want me to do. That's kind of what we call the call to action. So if you don't have a solution for them, all you did is informed. But that solution is what's going to launch you into the call of action. Now, how do you provide the evidence about these chickens or the cows or whatever, all this stuff that's being used to make that pink slime that later also is filtering over into the egg products and everything else? Well, you've got to remember, is the evidence, is it fact or opinion? If you're sitting there giving evidence that is your opinion, that look how bad these cows and these chickens are being caged, that's a problem. You've got to really go in there and give the facts of, the research studies that shows that these cows are caged and they're standing there in their own manure, and that manure is getting back into their blood system through the food they eat and other things, their digestive tracts, and it is therefore making it into a very poor, bad quality meat. And that fact comes from statistics. It could be USDA statistics, it could be maybe the Cattle Grazier Association, but you've got to get true facts, statistics, not just put in your opinion. It says here, where's your evidence come from? Make sure it always comes from a credible source and is it current. The worst thing you can do is to sit there and talk about something that is 10 years old when it's all been changed or it's been corrected. So that's the issue of logic. Logic is where you're going to make a sensible case with your audience. You're showing first that you're credible. You're going to give credible knowledge. You're going to show that you're credible by your credentials, basically. You're going to then make your argument from a logical viewpoint. And now you've got to bring in pathos, which is your emotion. And the pathos is the appeal to the audience's emotion. And I think in many cases this is the most important of the three. And the reason why I say that, when I'm talking about persuasion, is that you can have a great content, a great logical, credible argument, but if you don't show passion about it, it's not going to go anywhere. The audience doesn't feel the problem. If you're up there just lecturing about it, the audience will walk away thinking that you're just telling them about a problem, but that you're truly not passionate about the problem. So it's the pathos that actually goes in there and motivates the audience to continue to listen to you and to follow the cause, whatever your cause is and whatever your call to action is. So how do you use emotion to persuade somebody? You do it through touching, and you do it through what we call reaching. And you're trying to get in there and touch the audience figuratively, and you're going to reach into them, and you're going to go in there and you're going to touch their center part that's going to make them feel the passion that you feel about whatever your topic is. You do that through, it says here, vivid and descriptive language, talking about that pink slime. I know you don't, you've maybe seen the little videos about this, but you may not visualize that unless I throw up a video, and that video is that descriptive, vivid image. But what about if I show you pictures of caged chickens where they crowd 10 chickens into one cage, and these chickens are there for their entire life, from birth through death, and they came and move around. If I even telling you this, that creates the image in your mind. So these are the things. Sometimes you can show images, sometimes you've got to say it, but when you're saying it, you got to say it with a passion. You've got to use your pacing, your timing, your vocal delivery, the variety of your voice, the volume, to get that passion across to people. And it says here you can use emotional evidence such as stories and personal testimonies. This is just classic in persuasion. When you actually tell a personal story of why it's important to you, or you actually go there and tell statistics, maybe not statistics come across very passionate, but they do tell a story that you can then build off of, in turn tell another story or some type of personal testimony. Okay, so how do you touch and reach? Okay, let's talk about this for just a moment. This is very, very important, because good persuasion, there's lots of ways people teach persuasion, but this is the way I teach it. Good persuasion has to be done where you do not, now repeat that, you do not alienate the audience. So if you have got a issue, and I'm going to tell you about an issue that came up in a speech I heard one time, talking about sex education in schools, whether it's the school's responsibility or if it's the parent's responsibility. The persuasive speaker who was speaking about this did an outstanding job, and what she did is she first started to talk about the importance of the school teaching the child about sex, saying that the school was the right place. You have teachers who know how to teach. They know how to take a message and deliver it to their class, because they deal with their class all the time. They also have access to the best information about sex education. So they're able to take all this information and impart upon the children, and they can answer questions and not feel ashamed of the way they answer the questions. So this is the reason why the schools need to be so involved with teaching the children about sex education. Now folks, when this speaker said this, those in the audience who agreed with that the sex education needs to handled by the school, they felt in line with her. They felt like that she was presenting their case, that sex education in school was good. But then what she did is she came back and she said, but let me tell you, even though those are good points, let me tell you why those points don't convince me totally that sex education should be handled only by the school. Then she proceeded into the points about the values of the parent's involvement, saying that the parent knows the child. The parent knows the psychological makeup of the child. They know the maturity, the emotional level of the child. And maybe that third grader is too young, where at school, as institutionally, they're teaching all the third graders about sex. Maybe this third grader is not ready for it. Maybe that child that you know as a parent is ready when they're a fifth grader. But what if the school is teaching everybody when they're, say, a ninth grader? Then the parent says, but that's too late, because I live in a community where I know there's other kids out there who are sexually active, so I need to start telling my kids about problems that they can bump into when they're in 6th or 7th grade. I don't need to wait till they're in 9th grade. Next thing is that as a parent, you've got your own values. You've got values that you think about what sex is all about. You've got maybe religious values. These are things that are maybe family values that you want to impart upon your children. The school cannot do that, but you as a parent can. That's why it's so critically important that the parents are very involved with sex education with their child. Okay, now folks, I just went through what she said, and in the process, now she brought the other side of the audience to the table, those who believe in the parent involvement more so and less of the school involvement. So now she's brought those people up who she originally started to alienate when they thought that she was pro-school. What about those school audience members. She didn't say that it was wrong. She didn't come in there right off the bat and say, teaching sex in school is wrong, because if she did that, she would have alienated them. And when you alienate an audience member, they shut down. They stop listening. They just put up a barrier, and they don't hear anything you said, because the rest of the time, all they're doing is trying to prove that you're wrong in their mind. But if you start on their side, on the opposite side of what you're actually going toward, you're pulling that group of people with you. And then when you make that very gradual transitional flip over to what you actually are trying to get across, you're pulling those people and bringing the other ones in at the same time. Now, she was very careful to be respectful. It says down here, be respectful of their opinion and their views. She was very careful to be respectful by saying that I'm not trying to imply that only the parents need to do it. I'm not saying that. What I'm implying is that the parents may know more and they may be better suited than the school if the school did it all by itself. Then what she did is she came in there and she combined it together, saying it's a partnership. But the partnership needs to be led by the parents, not by the school. Okay, so what she had done here is she had moved it from not saying should the school or should the parents, she said, no, it is a partnership. And I believe the partnership needs to be led by the parent, because the parent ultimately has values that are important to them that they want to transfer to their children, and they also know their own child. And if they do not feel comfortable talking to the child, they know they got the school. Or if they feel like the school is talking too early or too late, they can go in there and ask the school to maybe exempt the child because they're talking to the child too early. Or maybe they go in there and say, I've already told my child about this, so he doesn't really need to be in this. He can listen to it, but I told him when he was earlier. So she did an awesome job, just a wonderful job, pulling both sides together. And when she got finished, the point is, what was the call of action that she had? The call of action is to get it out to your state board of educators, get it to your school district, is that we must have the schools involved in sex education, but they cannot dictate the sex education. It needs to come from the parent, and the school needs to respect the parent and the parent's wishes. And perhaps the teachers need to sit down with the parents when they're doing like maybe their one-on-one sessions about how the child's doing academically, and tell them that next month we're going to have sex education. Is there anything we need to know? And then the parent can sit there and make some comments and say, I believe this, or I don't believe that, or whatever. So she did a very, very good job on that. And the point I want to make there is that you've got to, and this is so critical, that's why I hit this part so hard, you've got to show that you respect all sides. You've got to be careful you don't alienate either side. Then you've got to go in there and present both sides with a logical argument. And then you can move it over to which way you believe by saying, I presented this, and let me tell you why I think there may be a problem with it. Then you're presenting a very logical argument. Now, you're going to have some people who are going to disagree with you, but that's okay. But you presented it very logically. Now, in this case, this girl, she had a lot of statistics showing about the schools who had trained the kids or taught the kids sex education as third graders, how it was not successful, but when they taught them as ninth graders, it was also not successful because it was too late. That the best time was to teach the kids when they were in fifth grade. So she did her homework. She had all this good statistics, and she had some excellent stories too about her own family and about some of her friends who learned too late, and by that time they had already become sexually active. Now, when you do your outline has to have an attention getter. Every persuasive speech has to have an attention getter, something. In this case here, this girl's, her attention getter do you know of someone you grew up with when you're in high school that was pregnant? Someone who maybe was a sophomore, or maybe they were a freshman who was pregnant. Whose job was it to teach that child about sex education? Was it the parents or was it the school? Who failed on it? Okay, so that was her attention getter. It had us all thinking, and then she asked the audience. She was polling, and that's polling means asking questions to the audience. Do you have any stories? How many of you knew someone who was pregnant in school? Well, in this group, I would say probably half of them raised their hands. And then she started asking, she said, tell me the story. And they would say, yeah, there was a girl in the classroom. She turned up pregnant. She was a ninth grader, and she disappeared. And then she came back later. She came back 3 months later, and she said she had a baby. And we didn't know all the details. But then she disappeared again, and we found out that she gave the baby over to her older sister. Now, what happened then is the speaker said, this is a good story because this tells you how it very likely could have ruined the life of that child and the life of the mother too, possibly because of something was missing. It was missing. Maybe it was a sex education that was either done too early or too late or whatever it was. So you see, folks, what happened, she was pulling the information away from the audience, and she was then building off of it. She was trying to build and create that attention getter into the cause that she was going down to. And that allowed her to do what's number 2 here, is tell the problem. So the problem is that we have a young girl, a girl who is 14 or 15, who is pregnant, who is disruptive, who her school life is disruptive because she's pregnant. She has to go away to have the baby. She comes back. She's missed 3 months. She cannot be with the rest of us because she has a baby at home. She can't go out with us, and her whole lifestyles change. And then because all these different factors in this particular person, she ended up giving the baby to her older sister. What type of emotional scar did that do to her? So see, what happens here is she now explains what the problem is. The problem is that could that have been resolved? The problem is the sex education. Could it have been resolved if she was taught earlier by the school about sex? Or would it have been resolved if her parents had taught her earlier? And that's what we're going to talk about, is whose responsibility is it? Is it the school's job or is the parents' job? And then that's your transition to the main point. So then you go into your body of your speech. Body of speech is why is it important to you? Why is it important to the audience? Okay, here is the problem. Is there a solution? You explain it, and then you move into what action. So let's take this one by one. Why is it important to you? Well, you may not want to sit there and say why is it important to you, unless you come in there and say, I'm a parent, I've got young children, I've got children who are 8 or 9, and this is important to me because I want to make sure that they don't fall into this problem like my older sister did. So that's where you're bringing why is important to you, why is important to the audience. And that's where you can build up all types of reasons. Maybe you've got a younger brother, younger sister. Maybe you know someone. Maybe you have a child yourself. So what you're having to do is you're having to take that, and it's until you make it important to the audience. You don't want to make it what we call a service learning announcement, where it's kind of like sex education is a problem we need to worry about. Okay, that's not going to motivate people. What motivates them is where you get them thinking about, yes, you know what, I've got a niece. Or yes, my children are that same age. I didn't realize it could happen to them. They're 12, 13. I didn't realize that. So once you drive it home, that's called touching and reaching, then the audience is now going to pay attention. And not only do they have their opinions, but they're interested to hear your opinion because you're going to give them factual evidence. Is there a solution? Yes, there's a solution. That's what you're here to talk about. That's your call of action. But you got to build to it. You got to explain what the solution is. The solution in this case is getting everybody involved. You remember what our solution is? Partnership. Partnership between the parents and partnership with the school. And together, they're going to solve the problem. And that's your conclusion. Your conclusion is what we call making the sale. That's not really, that sounds terrible in this case. Making a sale would be the difference between do you go to Starbucks or go to Seattle's Best. But in this case, it's more like a call to action. Contact your school board. Contact the ISD or whatever it is. And then you try to close the sale by asking for it. And asking for it means maybe is that I would like to encourage you to call your local school board or call your ISD. Or you may actually go in there and have a petition there that you say, if this is important to you that we do this, I would ask that you sign the petition. Just sign your name on there that you think this is an issue that the school board needs to address. And then it says here, ask if there's any questions. That's what you always do in an informative speech. Are there any questions I can answer? Make sure that your public, your audience understands. It's a little bit trickier here with the persuasion because if you don't watch it, your questions becomes a debate where people are trying to grab the floor to talk about their opinion, and you don't want to lose a floor. So the way you go about doing this, saying, not in terms, are there any questions I can answer, or is there anything I miss? But you would take it and tie it over to your call to action, which is there any questions about what we're doing by signing this petition? That way you may get a few people coming in there asking some questions, but if you don't want to encounter that questions right now, where you may say someone comes up there and says, yes, I like signing the petition, but I don't fully agree with that it's fully the parent's responsibility. I think the responsibility needs to be led by the school. Okay, your response then has to come back to is that I appreciate your point. I don't fully agree with that, but I would like to talk to you more about that. But maybe you and I can talk separately about this because I want to hear why you say that. Because folks, what you're trying to do now is you're trying to take it away from the overall audience, because you don't want to get back into this again. You've already made your pitch. You've got people signing the petition, and you got someone who can literally stop the signing by going in there. So you want to pull it to the side and say, it's important to me. I want to hear this. Well, what about you and I just sit here and talk for a moment? Come on up here, let me talk to you. Or I tell you what, after this, let's go have a cup of coffee and have a talk about it, and we can go get a Starbucks or whatever. Then, of course, thank your audience. Give them a reason for thanking them. I appreciate what you're doing because this is so important to me, because I've got young kids who they're reaching that age where they need to learn more about what sexuality is all is, about what boys and girls can end up doing. So you make a very quick thank you on that part. And with that, I want to thank you for listening to a little bit of a long presentation, but also a very important presentation, because persuasive speaking is what speaking is all about. Anybody can go out there and be an informative speaker. Anybody can go out there and just present information. But it takes real talent and it takes a real passion to be able to go out there and to present something to change someone's attitude, to change their beliefs, or change their value. And if you can do that, you are just going to be an outstanding speaker. With that, I appreciate y'all, and just please always remember, everybody is an accomplished speaker. You just have to get out there and find where your voice is as a speaker.